Good evening. It's Laura Donnelly from Dancing with Ease, Body Brain Balance, here tonight with the Healing Path. And my special guest tonight is Victoria Day. And I wanted to welcome you to the Healing Path and let you know that these are just conversations about healing, about the speaker's path that they took to different modalities of healing, different ways of working. But the primary thing that is the thread that runs through all of these is that healing starts with ourselves. It all starts with self-healing. And even if you go to a doctor, they will tell you that they can give you medicine, but part of your healing is your concept, your belief that you can get well. And so it's just, it happens. Doesn't always look like we expect it will look. Sometimes we have an idea that healing is going back to the way we were before something happened to us, whether we broke a bone or fell down. Even if you just skin your knee, the scab and the new skin are not exactly the same as the old skin. Sometimes they're stronger. Sometimes the things that happen to us that we have to heal from make us stronger. And Victoria is a friend of mine I met online. We are neighbors. She lives in Missouri, Central Time Zone. Woohoo! But we haven't never yet met in person, probably due to the stupid virus. But we have many things in common: an orientation towards the body, an orientation towards healing, movement and dance. And so I'll bring Victoria back into the broadcast, and she can tell you a little bit more about herself. Hi, Victoria.
Hi there, Laura. So great to be here with you.
I'm so excited that you could be here.
Yeah.
So,
Where would you like me to start?
do you want to tell people what kind of work you do? What kind of healing work? Because you have several
Yeah, and actually,
folks on the Healing Hub.
I was listening to your introduction, and I was just thinking about what exactly my healing path would look like if I mapped it out. And it's really funny because I have never, I mean, I've seen that so many times as I've listened to your podcasts, and I realized that unconsciously I was thinking a path, like straight line from here to there, right? And that's not at all. So my path is that I always loved to dance and to move all my life, and I also really found dance and movement to be very healing for me. And then I also discovered that because I kept hurting myself, that and what I discovered through the various healing modalities that I worked with, some more conventional, some less conventional, was that I was spending a lot of my time not really actually being in my body. So when people would say to me, like, I would go, be dancing out in the streets, and people would say, "How can you do that when there's thousands of people, that are seeing you?" And I realized it was because there weren't thousands of people where I was dancing, right? I was dancing with the energy or whatever. But the problem was is that I was trying to move in ways that were too big for my body, and I was also just trying to be in life in ways that were too big for my body. Um, and so if you and I had met 7+ years ago, I would have told you the story about how I became a fiscal analyst for the University of Missouri. But now my story is that I realized that I didn't want to sit in front of a computer for the rest of my life, and I realized that I really had wanted to. I was called to help people live their life more fully. That's my tagline for my business is embodiment. Live life more fully. Um, and the then it really came home to me. I was actually in the middle of my master's program for professional counseling when I suffered a traumatic brain injury. It's been a little over 9 years ago. And I had already known when I started that more conventional path of professional counseling that really what I wanted to do was to bring in the body. I always knew I wanted to bring in the body. I knew my own personal mental health path was not because I sat in the chair talking to my counselor, which I did do. I did do that path. But because when I was not in that chair, I was dancing and I was doing continuum and I was doing authentic movement and I explored Brima and, and in all of that searching, I'd also worked with a dance therapist and fell in love with the Laban, which is the next path that I took. That once I got my degree as a professional counselor, I got my master's level certification in Laban and Bartenieff movement analysis. But so in the midst of all that is I suffered this brain injury that luckily for me was what they call a mild brain injury. But I had vertigo. I had emotional things come up from it. I was very out of balance in the midst of it. Discovered that I had an autoimmune condition. So I was able to find out how much I hadn't been in my body and also how much I did know about healing my body. And so that really inspired me. The populations of folks. So to explain what has happened in my world is that I both function as a licensed professional counselor, Victoria Day LPC. Find me on Facebook. And I say that I am a somatic-based, trauma-informed, resiliency-focused mental health counselor. And we talked about when we say the word somatic, that's not a word that that a lot of people. I think it's being used more, but that it simply means of the body, soma, right? That we are always of the body. That we somehow have tricked ourselves into believing that we are thoughts walking around interacting with other thoughts, and that we're not, that we have, we are, I call them, when I talk with my clients, I say, we have a sensory body, we have a emotional body that's connected to the sensory body. It's also connected to the cognitive body. And that then we have this action body, the body that wants to move, that's designed to move. And that all of that lives, that we are all of those things. But when someone comes to me as a professional counselor, I understand that their idea of what a counselor is the person sitting there on the couch or the chair, like listening to their story. So we'll start with the stories. I mean, that if that's where people are comfortable, that's where we'll start. However, the thing that then makes that different than if someone comes to me as a somatic movement therapist is that usually when people come to me as a somatic movement therapist, they may have stories, but they really want to move. That's what they're already ready to get on the floor and roll around and do whatever. And so the thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, I think is important because it's the place that I start with all those people, whether they come to me as Victoria Day LPC or they come to me as embodiment, live life more fully, and as a registered somatic therapist. So
I think what you're saying is that you like to incorporate the concept of the body as part of our whole self, not just our mind or our story or our history, which is like this is one of the things that we have a common interest that crosses over, and
Right.
that you eventually get everyone to focus on the interaction with their own bodies.
Hmm.
But you might just start. Some people you start with the body, and other people you slide
Well,
the body in.
well, and I think that it's, because the thing is what I know is that when I'm hearing someone's story, that they're in the body, but most people don't. They don't. Um, they don't remember that. Right? They're telling the story about something in the past, and so this. Whereas the person who's coming in, who wants to move differently, um, usually, um, the interesting thing is they usually tell a story as well, right? But the difference is they tell a story, as an explanation for what it is they're seeking in their body. There just seems to be a little more, for most people. Now, this is not always true. I have a couple of clients who have sought me out as a professional counselor, because the other really practical, like just totally practical thing is that people can come to me as a licensed professional counselor and use their insurance. And we have the therapeutic plan, and we're rolling the body work into their mental health plan, where, someone who comes to see me as a somatic movement therapist, it's all self-pay. And so for some people that's daunting. Yeah, so I do have some clients that have sought me out specifically because they know that I do the somatic work within the mental health, realm. Yeah. And so the thing that I start out, all those clients, the thing that, whether they're telling me a story, and then I'll say, well, let's just, I call it the check-in, because this is what it's sort of, it's just, they say, years ago when I was learning how to train my dog, they say, use the word that is most natural to you when you're, don't pick a word that is just going to be foreign to you. And that's kind of what the logic I used is. I would say, well, let's just check in. And then I realized, like, oh, it's the check-in. Um, but it's also where I'll start a somatic movement client, right? And the check-in is, I call it the support resource of the eternal self. And it was really one of these aha moments that's, for me, was an aha moment, that there are there's so much information out in the world, and we've heard, oh, take a deep breath, and we've heard ground yourself, and right, and maybe we've even heard, like, just stop and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like look at 5 things, hear 4 things, right? However, a lot of people don't understand that the reason that we're invited to do those things is because they are developmentally what was foundational. They've been with us. I mean, I would argue that breath has been with us from the moment of conception, because our cells, even as we're sitting here, 75 trillion cells or whatever we have, I mean, every single one of them is doing the breath pattern, right? Is breathing in and breathing out. And in Laban, we talk about breath as the inner shaping force, right? Breath support. And so that's another piece of the check-in, is it's not just like, okay, so it's not a breath technique. You can use whatever breath, whether that's actually, I had a really funny experience a couple of weeks ago. Is in the same week, I had 2 people who I really admire explain to me that the best breath to calm you down was exactly the opposite. One told me that the best breath to slow yourself down is, so bringing some gentle tension in and breathing out, like you're cooling off your cup of coffee. And then a few days later, I was in a different training where she was like, don't let any tension come in your mouth. The best breath to calm yourself is oh. And I just laughed because I was like, and they're both right. Right. So that's what I tell my clients is that like I can't, I mean, I'm guiding, but I don't have the answer for you noticing right in this moment as you're checking in with yourself. Do you need a slow, more controlled breath? Do you need a more open, like a sigh breath? You know, whatever that breath might be. But then I invite them as they're breathing to really let themselves not just focus on the front of the face, but to actually feel the movement of the breath, the shaping of the, how are your ribs moving? How is your belly moving? Do you feel the sense of growing and shrinking? And so that's breath support. That's the first part of the check-in. And the second part is actually my favorite, which is grounded support. And I love it because we just take gravity so for granted. And I remember someone saying to me, and I wish I could remember where the quote originated, but that gravity is unconditional love.
Oh, that's interesting.
Gravity is unconditional love, right?
My
Gravity.
mom would say gravity is the enemy.
But so
if you're wanting to jump,
Right. Well, right. I mean, that's the thing is if you want to leave your body and float away, like, yeah, gravity is the enemy, right?
And that different people, different times, even the same person, different times, going to need all aspects of that. You're not checking in to see if you're breathing a certain way. You're checking in to see what's happening to your breathing, right? Just what's happening.
Yeah.
And what's happening with your body in relationship to gravity.
Well, and the thing about gravity, in the way that I was taught it, is that gravity is what holds us down, but then the earth is also sending up support, kinetic energy, kinetic chains, right? Whatever term, and it's that uplift and that's so helping. And this is where I use the constructive thinking from the Alexander technique. Is I will say to people, you are free to just allow your breath. You are free to accept the support of the surface under you, the earth, right? And allowing yourself to feel the support of the skeletal system. Because what I find is a lot of people are using their muscles as if they're skeletal, right? And that is neuromuscular repatterning is helping folks to feel not just I remember having a client that really helped me realize that even that term grounding, when you're part of a spiritual community like I am, grounding in itself can be a totally cortical experience. You can totally just, you can imagine yourself as a tree sending a root down and be holding yourself up away from gravity the whole time you're doing it, right? You can be holding your breath. And to really actually shift that from a cortical experience to a somatic, a sensory experience where you're really feeling and accepting the support through the bottom of the feet, through the sits bones, up through the vertebra and the ribs, and right, and all the way up. So that's the second part of the check-in, and it's that experiencing the support of gravity, which, I've never read this specifically anywhere, but I'm like, okay, if I picture, we start out, we're kind of floating around in the amniotic fluid, right? But then as soon as we get the umbilical cord, which I think, if I'm remembering my functional anatomy, was about 2 weeks from conception. As soon as you're attached to that uterine wall, you're being affected by gravity. Maybe not in the same way that you will be once you're, out and on your own, right? But increasingly you're going to be feeling. People often say that, like, the most important thing that's affecting, I've heard this said, the infant is the sound of the mother's heartbeat, and I do agree that is important. But there's also the mother's gravity, the mother experiencing gravity that's being that the fetus and the embryo are already starting to have that support. So it's just naturally there. We are a being created on a gravity planet, right? And then the third part is, I say it different ways. I mean, it's basically orienting, but it can be orienting to the body itself, like, and having people notice the way the front and the back body support each other. The right and the left half of the body support each other, at the upper and the lower. It can also be about orienting into your space, and that can be that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But because of my Laban training, I mean, I'm really inviting people to let themselves notice, what is behind you, and what is behind you above you, and what's to the right, and what's right low, right? And what's to the left forward low, left forward high, and having them actually not just move the body in the action because I'm directing it, but actually say, like, notice something that you enjoy in that direction. Noticing. Because that also, from as soon as we're sensory beings, right? And so as soon as we came out, we were starting to smell things, and that's what prompted movement, and that's what prompted the brain development, is knowing what was in our space. And so if you are someone who has, especially someone who's experienced trauma, and so you're what I call the psychological kinesphere, that you're not really in your personal space. You're not really in that area around you that you can touch. You're actually out there in the past or in the future, or you're remembering and imagining, and that if that's where you are living, it's really easy for your breath to get up here and all that tension to get up here. Right? And so that's, for me, the check-in is just has just been like, I mean, I know that it's nothing new, because it's based on things that any of us who have studied this sort of thing know. However, offering it as a package, right? Just like, here are these 3 things that no matter where you are, no matter what you are doing, you can access these support resources, and will be able to do so until your last breath. Okay.
Definitely. No, it is really lovely. And I was thinking, when I was looking around, to change my flowers out. No. But that because our eyes are in the front, we can get really frontally focused. And when people spend so much time at the computer these days, which is right here in front of you,
right?
That I was actually talking the other day that it's just good to reorient your eyeballs. You look at the screen, look across the room, let your eye refocus to the distance, and then get to the close up. And we walk in a frontal plane mostly, and so this orienting in
Mm-hmm.
Say like multiple planes, like the sagittal,
Right.
and
Yeah. Right. That's, yeah.
it's very, very. Actually, it's funny. It's funny because each one of these relates to the others.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you orient, that helps you feel more grounded right where you are. Because you
Yeah.
know what's behind you, you know what's beside you. We always sort of think we know what's in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is that so um one of the things that I had to do in my Laban training is something they call the dance done and the dance not done. And you basically, I was in the modular program, so you go off, you're in New York for this intense 3 weeks, and you learn what the people in the annual program learn in 3 months, in 3 weeks, and then you come home and you digest and rest and digest, and the dance done is actually like I had to write a piece of choreography that was all the pieces of the pattern that I use, like my pattern, my normal pattern. And I discovered that I spent 90% of my time with my head like this. Because if I was walking my dog, I was thinking about what I had to do next. And if I was, sitting at home, I was thinking about, like, I wasn't really looking at what was in front of me. And so then the dance not done is where you actually create a piece of choreography in which you're doing all the things you don't normally do. It's a wonderful process, was a little unsettling too, because suddenly I realized, oh my God, this is why my neck hurts all the time, right? Because I was, and I wasn't really looking at my feet so much as I was looking at the inside of my head.
Right. And
And just,
you just had a habit
right, yep.
that was overstretching the back and not
Mm-hmm.
utilizing the front.
Right.
And,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's
Yeah. And not breathing, and that's very unbalanced. But it's funny because I think about what we talked about, with the path is, but for the most part, I only walked places that I knew. And then um, I offer something called walking with awareness, which is sometimes I incorporate it in with my other clients, or I can just have a client who that's all we do. And it really is, it's bringing the check-in into also noticing, like, literally, where your head is, where your toes are, where your heels are, what are you feeling, what are you seeing, and when you walk with that, with your eyes open to really, like, and really orienting, not just being in the conversation or whatever, and actually letting yourself see, you naturally come into alignment, because you're like, oh, look at the dragonfly, or oh, look at that tree. Isn't that interesting? Like, and you're looking up and down. But I realized that that's not, I mean, it's really easy. I mean, even for me, it's really easy to fall into that pattern of, you know, walking like this, right? Because I'm looking in here, and
right.
yeah, yeah.
Let's go over the 3 steps again, just to make sure
Mm-hmm. Yep.
that people, want
Mm-hmm.
to remember them.
Okay. And just to be clear, I don't think of them as steps, because I feel like they can be done in any order, because just what you said is, if you orient, when you orient, right, you feel the ground, and you feel the support of the gravity and the strength. I think of it as a strength support. And then your breath, you because you're orienting and you're feeling yourself, your strength, you naturally just let your breath fill you up, right? So
more like a circle, like
mhm,
with these three
mhm,
sections.
yeah,
Or I'm thinking of seed pods too, Okay, now my
mhm,
brain just went to, how sometimes those little seed pods have three
mhm,
little parts in them and they have,
mhm.
and each one.
Yeah, you need all three. I mean, that's the piece, is that if you are taking deep breaths, but you are holding yourself up away from the earth, then your breath is not really flowing. If you oh, that's weird. I suddenly became blurry. Do I look blurry to you?
You just a little bit,
I don't I don't know what happened to my camera, but
the
um
internet.
luckily we're almost wrapping up, right? But
Yeah.
and if you like I said, and if you're not orienting, if you're only stuck inside your thoughts, then you're not going to be breathing, right? And you're not really noticing if you're really accepting the support of the earth, right? So you can really start at any of them, and I think that once if you let yourself not just breathe from here, but really let yourself feel the movement of breath, then you orient into your body. Right? So they all three go together, and they're all three developmentally, evidence based, right? If someone needs that piece, right?
And I was thinking, well, you could do it laying down
Oh yeah.
because I was thinking about dancers and how the
Mm-hmm.
relationship of dancers to the floor is so different than normal people's relationship to the floor.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was also thinking that, like, when you lay on the ground, you can feel your back widen on the ground and
Mm-hmm.
compress when you exhale. Or
Oh
if you lay
yeah.
on your side, you can feel one side go up and the side where it's on the ground doesn't really move.
Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely. And that's one of the great things is that because uh, I learned constructive rest is part of my, my Laban training, and they talked about it coming from Alexander.
They did,
Um,
they did in Laban because, really
mhm.
came from Mabel Todd
Mm,
and Lulu Swigart
through,
did
right,
that.
right, through a modern dance, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
she was the thinking body. She was the person
Mhm.
who Mabel Todd wrote the book, The Thinking Body. And so somehow dancers took it to Alexander technique, and then people think it's an Alexander technique thing.
Mhm.
It's like, no, really, it's a
No, not
thing.
really. Yeah, but that's like we were talking about. I mean, you know, um, I have been to classes with people who, I mean, what they're using, like Bartenia fundamentals, but they've never heard of Bartenia fundamentals. It's just, I think that's the nature is we learn things and actually it's one of the things that I I try to really do. Like when I use something that I've learned from you, or I've learned from Imogen, or I've learned from Susan Aposhen, or any of these other people that I've trained with. I mean, I want to give people cred because that's it. That I think that's really important with this web that we're in, is that the things that I'm talking about. Like yes, I learned as part of my Laban Bartenieff training, but then I've also I have a wonderful continuum friend in Texas who taught me about the jellyfish diaphragm, right? And so each they all come together.
They do, and
Um,
each person, each it's just like each dance teacher has
mhm,
studied from a whole number of people, but when it comes through you,
mhm,
then it has a different texture. And how you put it together, how you put the things from different places together is unique to you and,
mhm,
and your energy. And the thing that I also was thinking about in terms of the healing path is that it's not just one thing.
mhm,
It's a lot of things. And what our body needs today is maybe not what it needs tomorrow. And
mhm.
sometimes people get into a habit, like a habit of going to the gym or something, or a certain kind of dance class or exercise class. And they do that repetitively. And then
Yep.
just like you're walking, they
Yes.
had this habit, you fall into a
Right.
pattern of movement that maybe
Mm.
was excellent in the beginning and stretched your mind and stretched
Mhm.
your body,
Right.
but then it becomes habitual, and
Mhm.
then it it leaves out, the other dance is
Right.
not done.
Right. And that's, when because there was, and I'm still working on it, but there was definitely a long period of time where I had a really hard time verbalizing, like, what is the common theme between these two bodies of work that I do? Because they definitely overlap, and yet there is a distinct, like, I can tell you, you know, uh, even when I'm working with, if someone comes to me as a registered somatic therapist and they have anxiety and PTSD, and but they want to learn more about their body, even though that's in there's a distinct difference of how we work together than if that same exact client came to me in the clinical world. But the elevator speech, as I've call it, is that because I'm a Laban trained counselor, I am always looking for patterns. That's what Laban for me is about, is noticing the patterns of movement, not just the movement of my body, not just this kind of movement, the movement of my thoughts, the movements of my emotions, the movement of sensation through the body, and looking for what is the pattern, does it still serve me, right? Maybe we talk about when was the first time it ever did serve you, right? And maybe that's helpful, and maybe it's not of interest at all. But how do we shift that pattern? And I feel like there is a lot of people trying to shift their patterns without giving themselves the chance to know how to be settled. And so that's where the check-in comes in, is that, so you want to always know what's home base right at this moment, and then go out and seek some change. And if it starts to feel like that change is getting too big or too fast or too small or whatever the two is, I mean, that's what, when I talked with O'Shea Seaborn, the PTSD, the trauma awareness advocate, and she was saying, that trauma is when you have too much or too little for too long. And I was like, that's exactly perfect, because that's what I'm asking people to notice, is when they start to shift their patterns. If it gets too much or too little, or we've gone too long, then you check back in. Right, bring dock back onto the space dock, right?
Right.
Get on the lily pad, whatever. I've got lots of metaphors, right? And then to incorporate, like, then to digest what that, so that you can really actually literally change the pattern, not just force yourself to act like you're changing the pattern.
Right. I love
Right.
this. It made me think about the Alexander technique a little bit, because, like, when you have a slump, people are slumped,
Mhm.
they have tension, right? Then
Yeah.
I should sit up straight, and then
Oh, and they create tension.
they just
Yeah.
took the tension and stretched
Right.
it out.
Right. Yeah.
It's actually called in Alexander an upward slump.
Yeah.
Instead of a downward slump, we have an upward slump. It's the tension, and
Mhm.
so instead, like you said,
Mhm.
whatever you have to do to get to your pause neutral point,
Mhm.
so that you
Well.
change direction kind of from a free place,
Mhm.
instead of changing direction like as a reaction to something.
Mhm.
Because usually that's a little bit
Mhm.
overkill.
Mhm. Well, and what I tell, because I work with a lot of people with chronic illness, and stress and tension, and I tell them, okay, the thing is that right now, right up to this moment, that tension has been serving a purpose, because somewhere the body doesn't believe it's supported, and that muscle has tensed up because it's trying to act like bone, right? And the same thing happens in our thoughts. Like if we're doing this thing and we can't stop it, and it's up to this point. I mean, I tell people that about panic attacks. I'm like, panic attacks, you want to say, oh, thank you. Because if that panic attack hadn't slowed you down, you were moving towards something that was going to be way more painful, way more difficult, way more like your body is telling you, right? It can't go in that any further. But somehow we've shamed, like we've attached shame to panic attacks and nightmares and tension in our body. And it's like they're serving a purpose, and changing them without letting yourself slowly stabilize so that you can check in whether that purpose is still valid. And do you want to, do you want to keep relying totally on your front body as you sit on Zoom or on social media? Well, no, you don't have to. You can rely on your back body, right? But you have to notice that you've got the tension, and then it gives you information, right? It's information, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's so fun. Well, we might come back and talk again, because obviously, as we discovered this in our preliminary How Are You conversation, we could talk about the body forever.
I know. I can talk about it and move it and be in it and be curious about it.
And the thing that's really wonderful and amazing is that our body has been with us our whole life, and there's still new things to discover inside of it.
Yeah.
So for anybody watching, Vic does some online classes, and you have a Facebook group, right? And so all of her contact information is in the description about the video. And this video will live in the Healing Path, which is a free group. And I'd love for you to join if you haven't joined that group yet. And what happens in there is all these conversations are there so that you can watch them, hey, in any order. You can pick something to explore. And if your healing path just goes like this, that's perfect.
Well, and also I now have a YouTube page since COVID started. And in that YouTube page, I have both little different length videos about different somatic movement explorations. But I'm also part of a feminist radio collective. And so anytime I've done interviews since COVID, where the people have said it's okay, I post those as well. So another place to find about different healing modalities. Women, it's called Women's Issues, Women's Voices. So it's usually women identified. Yeah. So, and maybe I'll have to have you on my radio show. So we'll flip it around. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Laura.
Yes, thank you, Vic, and thanks everybody for watching. And if you have questions, put them in the comments, and we'll get back to you, because our whole idea is this is a learning, growing process. So thanks very much.
Thank you.